Hey everyone, welcome. Welcome to the annual Speed Secrets New Year's Day-ish Chalktalk. And let me just allow everyone to get signed in here. If you want to just put a hello or say hello to your friends or whatever in the chat area, please do. Hello from Switzerland. Awesome. From snowy Toronto. Oh, I thought Toronto was having some good weather a week or so ago. Snowy Iowa. Hey, Happy New Year from Kauai. All right. Thanks, Richard, for joining us. Aloha. And Minnesota, Kansas City, Colorado, Buenos Aires. Wow. Knoxville. Stormy Eastern Tennessee. Lithuania. Awesome. Virginia, Washington, Philly, Kansas. Vancouver, yay. Hey, great news. Italy, awesome. And hey, good news is if you live in the Northwest, it's warming up and it's starting to rain. Yay, so we can get rid of that white stuff out there. Again, thanks for joining me here. I started this a year ago. I said, I want to do just kind of a fun Chalktalk Q&A session on New Year's Day. And I did that last year. It was really fun. It was successful. It was fun for me anyways. I hope it was fun for those of you who were on here. And I decided I'm going to make this kind of an annual thing. So whether it's New Year's Day or the day after, depending on timing of some things, in around New Year's Day, I'm going to try to do this every single year. If you don't hear from me one year, I guess I'm not doing it anymore. But anyways, I'm going to keep doing this for a little while. The idea of this, if you have not been on one of my Chalk Talks before, the idea of this is it's simply a Q&A session. It's a chance for me to kind of interact with you and answer questions as we go along through this session. And so you'll see in the chat box area over to the right-hand side of your screen, there's a chat thing, and then there's a Q&A only section. And as my lovely assistant, Robin, will be monitoring all of your questions and helping me work my way through these questions. If you put something in the chat area, that's just chatting amongst yourselves, and that's fantastic. We part of this is I love the sort of the community that happens in these chat boxes. People kind of say, hey, I haven't seen you, or hopefully going to see you at Barber Motorsport Park this year or whatever. And so that's a great place for that. If you have a question, though, a specific question for me, click on the little Q&A only section and ask your question in there. Okay. The good news is this one that I did a year ago was successful, and I think that got people kind of wanting to do more of these things. The bad news is a lot of you signed up for this one, way more than I thought. And I'm going to say right now, I'm almost positive that I will not get through every single one of your questions. If I do not get through your question today, you know that on my website on speedsecrets.com, I have a thing that I have every Monday or every Tuesday, I post an Ask Ross thing. So if your question doesn't get answered by me today, please just email me your question. Send it to info@speedsecrets.com, and I will answer it in time. Sometimes, usually what I end up doing is kind of giving maybe a quick answer in the email, and then I save it for posting on my website at some point, and I can make it anonymous if you don't want anybody to know that you've asked that question. Had that a week or so ago, somebody saying, don't tell anybody that you're answering my question about this car that I'm racing this year. So this is for every single level of driver and every single type of driver, from if you drive on a track, and even if you drive, or not even, but if you drive on a track that's in a parking lot, like in an autocross, if you drive in the gravel, like in this rallycross, I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about some of that stuff that's going to apply to you. Okay, I'll just jump right in here. And actually, somebody did send me a question by email yesterday, and I'm going to use that as sort of my jumping off point for today. Matthew asked the question, do you have any tips for raising the minimum speed in a corner, and for sensing whether you're at or near the limit at the midpoint of a corner? And then he said, feel free to spend the entire Chalk Talk on this subject. And yes, Matthew, I could spend the entire time here. Did I say that I'm going to aim for in around 90 minutes or so. I'm going to probably start to think about wrapping things up. I know I've heard that people say there's like a football game or something going on, or some football games going on today. Anyways, so people have other things to do. I am going to try to wrap it up because I'm pretty sure we could spend 4 hours here. But let me jump into this question. So again, do you have any tips for raising the minimum speed in a corner and for sensing whether you're at or near the limit, at or near the limit at the midpoint of a corner? Okay, so how do you raise your minimum speed? Well, obviously the simple answer is don't brake. Well, actually, you could take that to a more realistic meaning there and just go brake lighter. Usually when drivers are trying to go faster, what they do is they think, okay, I'm going to brake later for a corner. And for sure, that can help you find some time. But most times, or many times, you can gain more lap time. You can improve your lap time more if you brake lighter and carry more min speed through a corner. So if let's say your favorite corner you come into and you're going to have some heavy braking, let's say you brake 2 car lengths later than you ever have before. That's usually quite a bit deeper into the corner than most drivers have ever done before. And if you did that, you might gain a tenth, maybe 2. But if you were able to do everything exactly the same as you did before, but you carried 1 mile an hour more all the way through the corner, and then you started to accelerate at the same place from that 1 mile an hour more, the speed that you've got down that next straightaway is going to be much higher, and you might gain 3, 4, 5, 6 tenths of a second. So raising your minimum speed in a corner is a good thing. Now, obviously, we can go too far, and then it delays us getting back to power, and that's a bad thing. 9 times out of 10. So how do you raise your minimum speed? Very first thing is, rather than thinking about braking later and harder, just brake in the exact same place, but brake lighter. So ask yourself right now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard am I braking? A 10 being threshold braking or just activating ABS, or just tickling that ABS. That would be a 10 pedal. So now what you do is you come to that brake zone and you say, if you were braking at a 10 before, you say, I'm going to brake at a 9. Or if you said, well, I brake at about a 9 there, you brake at an 8. If you said I brake at an 8 there before, you say, now I'm going to brake at a 7. So just think about that and triggering yourself to brake that 1 point lower with less pressure. It's going to force you to carry more speed in the corner. Now, I do recommend that you take a little time to mentally prepare for what that's going to feel like. So closing your eyes, imagining yourself getting into that corner, coming to that corner, and carrying more speed into the corner. How is the car going to respond? You may end up having to trail into the corner a little deeper. So if in the past, let me park these cars in the paddock area here for the moment. So if you're coming into this corner and your turn-in point is right there, and you're braking. You start braking here. You brake all the way into here, and then you trail off the brakes. And let's just say that right there, that is your end of braking point. Okay, that's your end of braking point. Now that you're braking lighter, you're still going to start braking at the same place, but you're probably, because you're going to be lighter braking, your end of braking point might be here, because you still have to carry some of that. You have to get some of that speed off. But if you just move that end of braking point in a little bit, now you're probably going to end up carrying 1 mile an hour more through that corner. And if you do that a few times, you might raise it 3, 4 miles an hour, and that's going to be a huge improvement in your lap time. The other thing you can do is you can just start coming down into here and begin. So rather than beginning to release the brakes here, so let's say that you start to ease your foot off the brakes here and trail off the brakes as you're coming into your end of braking point there. Now you start here. So you start releasing it a little sooner, but still slowly, so your end of braking point is the same. If you think about that, that's going to actually increase your corner entry speed just a little bit. And so it's not going to be, it's not going to be a big gain in speed. It's like, it's not going to be 10 miles an hour more. It's going to be 1-2 miles an hour more in doing that. So braking lighter, starting to release the brakes a little sooner so you flow more speed into the corner. But by keeping your end of braking point around the same place, and maybe even a tiny bit later, the car will still change direction enough, because you're going to have just enough load on those front tires to get the car to turn. Okay, so that's the first part of your question. And I know I'm spending a lot of time on the first one, and I'll get a little quicker with the next answers. But this is such a good one to kind of start this whole thing off with. The second part of the question is, and for sensing whether you're at or near the limit at the midpoint of the corner. So how do you know whether the car is at its limits at that point in the corner? And, you know, one of the things that often I'll see somebody's video, their in-car video, and I'll see them coming through this corner. They're coming through this corner, and the steering wheel looks like this. They're coming through the corner, and it's like this. And when I see that, not always, but many times, most times, I think, that driver is not quite at the limit. If the steering wheel goes through like this and there's a little, then I'm starting to see a driver making corrections. So if the steering wheel is very steady going through the middle of the corner, you're probably not at the limit. You need to be making some adjustments all the way through the corner with the steering, and probably with how you release that very last little bit of releasing the brake pedal and getting back to throttle somewhere in there. If you find that you are not making any adjustments or corrections to the steering wheel, then you're probably not going fast enough. There's more there. And then that would tell you that, okay, I could brake rather than at a 9 pedal, I could brake at an 8 pedal, or I could brake at a 7 pedal, and just start gradually inching your way in there, rather than trying to get it all from braking later here. Okay, so gradually work your way into that. And as I said, mentally prepare for that, taking a little time of, what's that going to feel like? How am I going to feel inside? You know, am I going to be like, and if so, if you're all tense, relax. Because if you're tense, you're not going to be able to sense what the car is doing there. Okay, and one last thing I just want to, because again, this will kind of probably lead to some, I'll be able to use this for some other answers for some other questions. I'm pretty sure, I'm predicting. But let's just look at the old slip angle versus grip. So over here we have traction. Here we have slip angle. And the way tires work is, as we get more slip, we gain traction. So the slip angle graph looks something like that. Okay? So as it slips, we gain traction, and then it starts to taper off. Okay? You know that as a gut level kind of a thing. You know that if you're just driving around really slow, there's no slip in the tires at all, right? There's no slip angle in the tires. So you could, and let's just say that, okay, so here's the peak of the tire right there. And I don't care what the percent or degree of slip angle, I don't care what the number is. Like, you know, people say, well, you know, is it 5 degrees? Is it 3 degrees? Is it 10 degrees? It doesn't really matter. But let's just pretend, so we can kind of imagine this thing, that's 5 degrees right there. If you drove, I'll use a different color here. If you drove with the tires there or there, that's 4 degrees and that's 6 degrees. Okay? The speed that you're driving through the corner at 4 and at 6 is going to be the same, because you're at the same limit of traction there. But the difference here is at 4, you're driving through the corner like this. And there's no corrections because the car is really not at its limits. If you're going through the corner at 6, you're probably going to be making some little adjustments through the corner. Now, is that the fastest way to drive? No. Driving right there would be at 5 degrees, at that peak of the graph. But here's the thing. If you practice for a little while here, it's easy to bring it back over to here. If you spend all your time here, you're constantly going, where is that limit? Where is it? Where is it? But if you go slightly over the limit and then you bring it back, that's easier. Well, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier, okay? So that's a target and something I'm pretty sure we're going to come back to with some other questions as we go along through here. So great way to kind of start this thing off. And now I'll jump to some other questions. Raphael asked, how would you approach the transition from Formula Ford to Formula Atlantic? Ooh, I did that a long time ago. Is it simply an acclimatization? Wow. Can't say that today. Acclimatization. Thank you, Robin. Or is there something specific required when dealing with aero cars? So here's the biggest thing going from a non-downforce, non-aero car like a Formula Ford to a Formula Atlantic car that has wings and the underside of the car is generating some downforce. And I'm sure you've heard this before. The advice is when you feel like the car is at the limit, drive faster, because the car going faster will generate more aerodynamic downforce, pushing the car into the track even more, gaining grip. Easy to say, not easy to do. There comes a point in time where there's almost a little bit of blind faith, trust that, okay, I'm just going to go faster and it's going to stick. Take that to the extreme. The first time I went, did my rookie orientation at the Indy 500. You go to the speedway and you come down into turn 1 and you're like, I'm doing 225 miles an hour. There's no way this thing is going to stick when I turn into the corner. And actually, sorry, in rookie orientation, you go through these periods where you got to drive at between 200 and 205, then 205 and 210, and then 210 to 215, or whatever it was that year that I did it. And I got to tell you, at 205 miles an hour, an Indy car at the speedway is terrifying. You turn into the corner and the thing's moving around. It actually moves around. And you go 5 miles an hour faster and it moves around less. And then you go even 5 miles an hour faster and the thing is stuck. And you go, oh, yeah, I like that. And you go 5 miles an hour more and the thing's even stuck more. And there's like massive G loads forcing up against you. So, Raphael, I think that's the biggest thing is you have to trust that in fast corners. Now, corners that are, second gear corners, second gear corners in an Atlantic car, maybe even starting to get into low speed third gear corners, you might not notice it a lot. But definitely in the upper range of third gear corners, fourth gear corners, fifth gear corners, you're going to feel that the faster you go, there's going to be a moment there where it's like, it doesn't stick. And then you go a little faster and it sticks. The biggest thing that you've got to watch there is that you don't overreact. If you turn into the corner, let's say it's a fourth gear corner and you turn in and the car starts to move and you go with the throttle, that's going to upset the balance of the car. Those cars generate so much downforce from the bottom of the car being flat that if you do this, you lose grip. So that's where you've got to trust that it's going to grip. It will. And just be really smooth with it and keep the car thinking about the balance. So I'd say that so part of that is the trust and the blind faith that it's going to have more grip the faster you go. The second part of that, though, is with any aero car, any car that generates aerodynamic downforce from the bottom of the car, from the tunnels underneath, the shape of the floor, something like that, prototype sports cars, even like radicals and things like that, to some extent, are generating some downforce from the underside of the car. And those cars, the flatter you can keep the platform, the more aerodynamic downforce they've got. If you start doing this, you're losing grip. You start doing this, you start losing grip. So keeping the car balanced, and that's, Smooth is fast. Well, smooth is fast in an aero car because it's keeping the platform and the aerodynamics working better. Okay, Kevin asked, since it's the passing driver's responsibility to ensure the pass is pulled off safely, how can the drivers communicate effectively to ensure that? Well, I'm going to say when it comes to racecraft, there is no ensuring, ensuring or insuring, with an E or an I in there. So the very first thing is, and just, you know, there's sort of always been this general rule. And Kevin, you pointed out that, you know, it's the passing driver's responsibility to ensure the pass is pulled off safely. Yes. Does that mean, though, that as the driver being passed, you can just shut the door on that driver and go, that was their responsibility? No, you can't. It's a two-way thing. You got to work together to some extent. And the thing that I see the most is drivers fighting for a position when it's not worth fighting for a position. And because I've been spending a lot of time in the sim racing world lately, I've seen a little bit more of it, not a lot more of it, but a little bit more of it in sim racing. And, you know, obviously the consequences are not as high in sim racing, but sometimes, many times, the very, very best thing you can do at that point in time, and let me set up this. So we've got a car coming into here, and you can go, okay, so it is this driver's responsibility to make a safe pass. Okay, but does that mean that just turning in like that, is that a good thing? Obviously not. So how can you communicate that? The biggest thing that you can communicate that as this driver here, the best thing you can do to communicate that is to get yourself in a position where this driver knows that you have control of the corner. I'm not saying you own the corner. I'm not saying you're responsible for making a good pass. I'm just saying you control the corner. When you put yourself in this position here, you have kind of taken the control away from this driver. This driver, I mean, yes, the driver could turn in and hit you, but that doesn't benefit them, and it's unlikely they're going to just hit you like that. By putting yourself in this position here, you control the corner where this driver then has to either try to drive around all the way around the outside, and eventually they're just going to lose out. You know, they could try, you know, being real patient here, turn back here and try to get the over under. But by having your car this far up alongside them, you've delayed that for so long that they're really going to not have a very good run out of here. If you put yourself in this position here, you have not communicated that you control the corner. You put yourself into this position where the only thing that you've communicated is, I'm unsure what I'm going to do here. And this driver then has two options. One is they can try to drop you off there like that, or they could let you scoot through, and they're going to get a better run out of the corner coming this way. Same thing. If you come by and you do this, what you communicated is, I've passed you, and I've given you the opportunity to come back at me. Like that. Okay? So to your question, Kevin, directly is, you know, how can drivers communicate effectively to ensure that? How? By the positioning of the car. This is no good. This is not as good. What's really good is this, because there's no doubt. So there may come at a point in time where, as you come into the brake zone, where you have to, as this driver, you may end up having to kind of ease your foot up off the brakes a little bit, let the car get right up beside, and even if that means you turn in a little bit late, you're in a position here where, you know, you don't want to force this car off the track, but at least you put yourself in a position where you have control of the corner, and it's really clear. The other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to be over here, because that also communicates, well, first of all, it doesn't communicate a lot, because most drivers, this driver it's hard to see that driver over there. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see is people not positioning the car here or here, but they position way over here. So what I would do is to communicate, get yourself in a position where it's clear. 9 times out of 10, it's if you can get the nose of the car in around the front wheel of this car, some people would say, you know, equal with the middle of the car. That's not bad. There's a bit of a gray there because some of it could be, is it here? Is it here? You know, where are you beside it? If it's like right there, you may be here when you get to the turning point, but back, or after you've turned in, but back here, you're still here. So by the turn-in point, and maybe even a little before, I think if you get the car right up here, you've communicated to the other driver that you control the corner. DJ, 2-pager. Okay. Please compare and contrast the braking technique in a Formula car, e.g. a Formula 2000 or Formula C car, when entering a corner with that of a sports car. A Formula car seems to respond best with no trail braking, braking hard initially, getting off the brakes and rolling speed into the corner to the apex, and gradually applying throttle through the middle and exit. This is in contrast to the Speed Secrets books where it is recommended that never coast, always being on throttle or brakes. Thanks for clarifying. So DJ, first of all, everything I say in my books, it's a guideline. There are no rules. And I've tried to at times clarify that what I've written in the books is that's not like a rule that you never, ever coast. It's a good guideline. It's a good recommendation. You want to coast as little as possible. However, there does come a point in time where in some cars, when you come into the corner, and you come off, and let's say your end of braking point is here, and where you get back to throttle, let me draw this. So your braking zone comes in like this. There's your end of braking point, end of braking, and where you start to get back to throttle is over here. Sorry. Uh-oh, time for new green pen. So one could say that from here to here, acceleration is now going to be blue. You could say that that's coasting. Well, I just like to sometimes think about it as sometimes you need to hesitate before you go back to power to let the car finish rotating so that then when you go to power, you can commit to throttle. Okay, so that's just some clarification around that. Back to your point of a Formula car, the difference between it and a sports car, and I'm going to say a sports car is a production-based car, you know, Porsche 911 base, one of the gazillion different models they have, or BMWs or Mustangs or Miatas or whatever, right? Do you need to trail brake more or less with a Formula car? Yes, more or less. I have driven Formula cars where I had to trail brake absolutely as much as I did with a production-based car. I've driven some production-based cars where I need to come off the brakes really quickly and get off the brakes and unload the front end because the front end could get overloaded too much. So this is one of those ones, DJ, where I'm going to say, I don't really have a guideline where I'm going to say, oh, in open wheel cars, you always release the brakes earlier than you do in sports cars. I don't believe that. I honestly don't believe that. I have spent decades driving sports cars and open wheel cars and prototype cars and big sedans and little ones and front wheel drive cars and rear wheel drive cars and all wheel drive cars and all sorts of different things, aero and non-aero cars. And honestly, there is no rule that, or guideline even, that says these cars require less trail braking than these cars do. I will say that in a lot of cars, like a Formula 2000 car, the trail braking is actually more sensitive because the cars, you can overload those front tires in a like a Formula 2000 car or something like that, an open wheel car like that. You can overload it so coming off the brakes gives some grip back to those front tires. And that's really what you're talking about here. So I've had drivers say, oh, with my Formula whatever, I don't trail brake. And I go, okay, can I look at the data? And you look at the data and you go, oh, there's trail braking there. It might be a little shorter, rather than here, it might be here. So it might be a little bit less. But again, it just comes down to how well the car responds to turning into the corner on brakes. Rick asked, interested in tips on driving with a welded differential. Drove my MGB for the first time at Nelson Ledges back in October and really struggled with turn 15. Well, Rick, it has been a while since I drove with a welded differential, but I'm trying to think of the best way. First of all, the reason we have a differential, right? We're going to go around this corner. We're going around this corner. And if you think about it, this on a rear-wheel drive car, your MGB, this wheel goes a shorter distance than this wheel does. And that's why we have a differential, so that the outside tire can turn faster than the inside tire can as you're going around a corner. It's a really cool video that was done, back in the 50s, I think by General Motors. Looks like it was made with Tinker Toys or something like that. It's a fantastic video if you go and search on YouTube and find it. It's a really fun little video, but it starts off with a motorcycle drill team. It's really kind of old-fashioned, but a brilliant explanation of how differentials work. Okay. With a welded differential, you've got both these wheels trying to drive the car, and when both of them are welded like that, they're going to both turn the exact same speed. So this one either has to slip and slow down, or this one has to turn faster. So what's going to happen is those two rear tires, it doesn't want to turn, it doesn't want to allow the car to turn. It wants to keep driving the car straight. So the problem with a welded differential is it doesn't want to turn. So that's a case where trail braking typically is going to help a lot. And obviously, well, it is dependent a little bit on brake bias as well, how much brake pressure you've got on the front brakes versus the rear. If you've got a car that has more, quite a bit more, in fact, with a welded differential, if you can reduce the amount of brake bias you have on the rear, what's going to happen is as you turn to the corner, you're going to load the front end up and you're going to try to, it's almost going to be trying to lift the rear tire. If you watch really good go-karters, they turn to the corner and that inside rear wheel, because it has a solid rear axle, just like a welded differential, it lifts that inside tire off the ground, and that's what helps them turn. So in a way, that's what you're trying to do with a welded differential, is get the car to lift up that inside rear tire, to unload it, to allow the car to turn. And by trail braking more into the corner, you're kind of putting more weight out on that outside front tire to lift that inside tire. Okay. Russ asked, is there an effective way to use the iRacing driving line? So if you haven't used iRacing and followed the recommended line they put out there when you're first learning to track, it can be very helpful. I find, well, this is a difficult one because some drivers spend too much time following the iRacing line and they don't really figure out why they're driving that line. And that's why I started the whole Sim Racer Academy thing, is to help sim racers understand the why behind some of the things they've learned. I know sim racers who followed all those lines and eventually just found out that it works. But if you ask them why, and I've actually said to a sim racer one time, I said something about, well, why do you use, I think you should maybe try a little later apex. And he kind of looked at me and said, I've heard of this word apex, but I don't really know what it is. Now, I'm not saying that you're there, but it's one thing to follow it. And it's very similar to going to an HPD, a high performance driver education event, and having an instructor say, drive this line, go to here, go to here, go to here, clip past this cone, then to that cone, then to that cone, to that cone. And you learn that's kind of the line you want to take, but you need to understand the why. And for me, what I would do is I would follow that line for a while, and then I'd stop using it. And then I'd go back and use it again a little bit. But what I would do is I would deliberately drive a little bit off of that line and find out. I mean, the good thing about a simulator is you can make a mistake and it doesn't cost you anything. So what I would do is deliberately drive off of the iRacing line and find out what the result is. Because as soon as you find out that, oh, if I turned in early, oh, I ran out of road at the exit. You know, I turned in really early here and just drove off out here. You know, the line said I should drive like this, but I did this. Oh, you don't have to learn that lesson very many times before you realize I'm not going to do that again. You know, or you could do the opposite of drive super late like this and come out of here, but you'll realize that it's not the fastest way to get around the track doing that. So what I would do is I'd start off using it, then turn it off for a while, then come back and use it, but deliberately drive a little bit off of that line and learn the why behind why is that line shown there. And by the way, not every single line that iRacing shows you is the best line. Most of them are pretty darn good, but they're not perfect. Okay. Ed asked, would like your advice on how to increase speed through high-speed corners. Hold your foot down on the gas pedal. Sorry. Bad joke, Ed. Okay. So many times the reason that drivers overslow for fast corners is the very first thing is they're not looking far enough ahead. They're not planning where they need to be. And part of that is because those fast corners are long corners. They're typically very long corners. And sometimes it's almost like, you know, you're used to looking, let's just pick a number, 100 feet in front of you. But this corner, this long fast corner, a high speed corner might be 200 feet long. So all of a sudden you got to go, oh, I actually have to look further ahead in those faster corners. So that's the very first thing that I think of is to increase your speed in high speed corners is focus on even looking further ahead. And, you know, I did this whole training around the vision process. And one of the things that the best drivers do is as they get to a corner, they do a quick glance out to the exit and then come back and look more at where the turning point. And then they glance out to the exit or past it and then come back and look to the apex. And then look out onto the following straightaway and then back to somewhere between the apex and the exit. And so they're kind of doing this quick glance ahead and then coming back and focusing more on the main reference in front of them. So I would say the vision part of it is a big part of it. The second part of it is many drivers, it's not always that most or many, more than 50% of drivers that I see that struggle with a high speed corner is what's difficult about a high speed corner. They can be a little intimidating because you're going so much faster, things happen a little quicker, and the consequences sometimes are either truly higher or they appear to be higher, the consequences. So of making a mistake. So they come into that corner and they go, and they hold their breath. And the best thing you can do in a high speed corner is as you get to the turning point, go. If you exhale, if you deliberately exhale, and if you practice that, and by the way, if you visualize doing that for some period of time and do mental imagery of coming to that corner and going, and seeing yourself and feeling yourself relaxed, your arms relaxed, your body relaxed, you're going to be more sensitive to what the car is telling you. If you come into that same corner and you go, you're tensing up and you're not getting as much feedback. So the big thing, and by the way, if you're not looking far enough ahead, you tend to tense up. You look further ahead and it's like, oh, I just got to drive over there. So you relax more. So vision, relaxing, and understanding, again, that we bring out the Ford GT, that a car that is doing this has less overall grip than a car that's doing this. A car that's doing this, it has less overall grip than a car that's doing this. So when somebody says smooth is fast, that's why. The better the car is balanced, the more overall grip it's going to have. So so part of being fast in fast corners is keeping the car, that platform, flat. Josh asked, how would you approach pushing a reducing radius corner after a long straight? Josh, the problem with me answering that question is you haven't told me what's after the decreasing radius corner. So much of that depends on, if you come around this corner and it's just another straightaway, or does it go into another corner over here, or does it come over here? Generally, I'd say, you're gonna in that kind of a corner, you're going to try to move your brake zone in, your whole brake zone in. So from the beginning of braking to your end of braking, you're going to be able to often, not always, but often with a reducing radius corner, you can actually move it like that. So you can kind of move the whole brake zone in, because the beginning is opened up a little bit like this. It's opened up. You can then have the car kind of tighten up, and then deal with whatever it is over here. But again, I don't know what the answer is without knowing, is there another corner, or does it lead to a straightaway or something like that? But I'd say often, not always, you can move the whole brake zone in. Ann asked, can oversteer, understeer be used for an advantage when corner on track? Yes. Next question. No. Yes, for sure. Great question, because sometimes you want the car to change direction. And if you've got a car that oversteers a little bit, that I can get the car to change direction. So sometimes that can be an advantage. In fast corners, going back to Ed's question about high-speed corners, you want a little understeer. You never hear a driver at Indianapolis saying, man, I wish my car was more loose. You hear drivers at most say, I wish the car was more neutral. Because at Indianapolis on the speedway, you turn into the corner, the last thing in the world you want is the car to start to oversteer. You want a little understeer, because you can then, all you got to do is you can adjust that, and you can play with that with the throttle, and you can control that, how much the car turns with the throttle then. You hear drivers on oval track say, I need the car to be a little more neutral. Or I actually want the car to be less pushy, or more neutral, being the car is understeering and I just want it to be just a little bit less understeering. You don't want it to be loose. So, and for sure, in fact, I would say that's actually kind of part of your job, is to use the oversteer and understeer in ways that are going to help you. So think about, okay, the car oversteers here. How can I use that to my benefit to get the car to change direction more? Or if it's understeering, know that I can carry more speed in. The car understeers, I'm not afraid to push the car and carry 2-3 miles an hour more into that corner or through the middle of that corner, because I know that I can just breathe the throttle a little bit and get the front end to hook up again and carry on. So yes, you use the oversteer and understeer. Why are some types of cars faster? Lyle asked, why are some types of cars faster with a slower ramp up to full brake pressure? GT cars versus Formula. Lyle, so big thing here is what type of brakes you have. So very first part is just simply, are they steel brakes, like steel rotors, versus carbon brakes? Carbon brakes, Formula car, like a Indy car, even like prototype DPI, LMP2, LMP3, LMP2 cars that have carbon brakes. I mean, that initial application of the brakes is just like, boom, it's pound on the brakes as hard as you possibly can. You want, if this is, make sure you can see it. Okay, so if this is the brake pressure, so the amount of pressure, looking at it on a data system, so you're going along and it's 0, 0, 0, 0, boom. That's where you want the graph, the brake pressure graph, to look pretty much in a car, for sure, a car with carbon brakes. If you were driving a GT car that had steel brakes, for example, you might want just a little bit of ramp up. And it might look a little bit more like that. You're not going to get as high a pressure because it can't take that amount of bite. If you're driving to go back to, I'm sorry, who had the MGB, you know, with those brakes, you might need it to look more like that. So it's more of a real gentle squeeze, and that's an exaggeration there. But different cars require a different amount of that. So part of it depends on the brake components, whether they're carbon brakes or steel brakes. Part of it depends on the amount of tire the car has. You know, a Formula car, a GT car with aero. The other thing is, you know, the brake pressure trace like this in a Formula car or a prototype car will look like that in a high-speed braking zone, but it actually starts to look a little bit more like this in lower speed. Why? Because at this speed, the car might have 2,000 pounds of downforce from the aero pushing down on it. But as it starts to slow down, it has no more downforce than a GT car might have, approximately. So why are sometimes it's the brake components, steel versus carbon. It has to do with the amount of aerodynamic downforce. Can also get into things like the suspension. You know, a lot of Formula cars and prototype cars now use what they call a third spring, which helps support the car from doing, you know, as you get on the brakes. And if you've got soft enough suspension to allow the car to be compliant going over bumps and have good grip through the corner. But if you get on the brakes, it would just go boom. It would just really nosedive and you know, bottom out and get into the bump rubbers and packers and things like that. But by using a third spring, they use a third spring, and I'm not going to get into explaining how all that works here right now. But it actually helps support the front end of the car. So it helps there as well. So there's to why, it's all of those things. Angus asked, I've noticed I vary brake pressure when blipping the throttle during downshifts. Any tricks to keep brake pedal pressure more consistent? Angus, this is such a common thing that when a driver goes to okay, so we've got the gas pedal, we've got the brake pedal, and over here we've got the clutch pedal, okay? Right here, we have a floor. If your foot is, when you go to heel and toe downshift, let me see if I can draw. There's your foot. Most of your foot, the ball of your foot is on the brake pedal. That might actually be more here, but the ball of your foot is on the brake pressure or on the brake pedal, and then just the side of your foot does a little like this. And for many drivers, that action takes a little pressure off the brake pedal, and that takes practice. Now, the biggest problem I see drivers make or have there is it's because their heel is not on the floor. If your heel is not on the floor, you don't have a pivot point to work from. If you're doing it like this and your whole leg is doing it and you're kind of trying to do this, for sure the brake pedal or the brake pressure is going to change. So the very first thing, Angus, I'd say is practice doing it, making sure that your heel is on the floor. And maybe it already is, in which case I'd say, you know, it might take a little bit of adjusting the pedals to get them to fit you better. You know, ideally you want it so that when the brake pedal is at sort of maximum, it's pretty close to the same level as the gas pedal, the throttle. So then it's just a matter of boom, boom, just a little twitch of the ankle to blip the throttle like this. If it's like one of these things where the brake pedal's up here and you're having to kind of really stretch like this, then for sure it's hard to modulate the brake pedal while heel and toe in at the same time. So First thing is make sure that your heel is on the floor, because then you've got that pivot point, and it's almost like, you know, you've got like it's almost like there's a rod end on the bottom of your heel on the floor, and all it does is that work the gas pedal, works the brake pedal, and then it does this. And that's what you want in the perfect world. Some cars, it's very difficult to do that. You might have to adjust the pedals, you might have to adjust the floorboard, all sorts of different things. But that, and then Angus, the last part of that is it just takes a lot of practice. Michael asked, when is he going to take a drink of water? Right now. Michael asked, which aspects of racing are most important for learning for intermediate drivers? Wow. Whew. So Michael, I look at racing, and, you know, so we have drivers on here who are competitive wheel-to-wheel racers. We have drivers who are into non-competitive driving, doing track days, working on their driving technique and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of racing, I think about it as you've got three things. You have to learn the limits of the car. You've got to learn to drive the car quickly. So you also have to learn, number two is you have to learn the track or tracks that you're going to be driving on. So the subtleties of the track to get the most out of the track. And the third in racing is racecraft. And which is most important? I would turn that question back to you, Michael, and say, which is most important for you at this point in time? Because there's no one answer for every driver. For some drivers, the way to improve their racecraft is to drive faster. So then it would be outright speed becomes number one priority. For another driver, it might be being better at knowing the subtleties of the track and getting the most out of the track. For another drivers, it might be their speed is good and they know the track well, but they don't have enough awareness of the other cars around them or know how to position themselves in racecraft situations. So as a novice, most times I'd say just get your speed up to a point where you're in the ballpark and you know the track well enough that you're there. And then racecraft becomes a little easier because the speed differential is not so big. As a advanced, really experienced racer, it tends to be more towards racecraft because their speed and track knowledge is pretty good. And then it becomes more around strategy and positioning and awareness and all those things. As an intermediate, it's somewhere in between all those things. So, Michael, I'm sorry, I can't give you the answer, but I think if you think about it in those terms, are you looking for more outright speed, more track knowledge, or better racecraft? And then just identify one of those things and go, that needs to be the priority right now, or whatever. Marcus asked, GT3, how do race car drivers adjust their style to driving a front, mid, or rear engine car? And would Porsche be able to compete if it were not for BOP? Oh boy. Or is a rear mounted engine actually an advantage? Well, I could just offend all my Porsche friends and say, you know, come on, guys, put the engine where it belongs. Porsches with the engine, rear engine, in a way, I think Porsche people would admit this as well. It's one of the most amazing things about the engineering of those cars. From a pure theoretical perspective, that engine hanging out the back behind the rear wheels or partially behind the rear wheels is not the ideal. There's too much polar moment of inertia. It's like a big pendulum back there. Ideally, that's not the best. But through years and years and years and years of development and tweaking and tuning, they made those cars so good. Now, they've also begun to move those engines into the middle of the car. So that's the end of my little soapbox thing about all that. Your question really is, how do race car drivers adjust their style to driving the front, mid, or rear engine car? So one of the things that, one of the drivers that I started coaching when he was 12 years old, Colin Brown, who races in IMSA currently. kind of generally accepted as being one of the best drivers in the entire world. And I've spent a lot of time with Colin, and he's just an amazing person. And we were talking one time, because he was on my podcast one time, many times, more than anybody else actually. But we were talking one time about kind of this topic a little bit. And I said, Colin, what's your opinion in terms of when people say, oh, that's a front engine, or a front engine line, or that's a rear engine line, or that, you're driving a Porsche, you got to drive the Porsche line, or you got to drive, an open wheel car this way, or on that line. And he went, at Road Atlanta, I can't remember, I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but he said, at Road Atlanta, I've driven NASCAR Cup cars, I've driven Formula cars, I've driven prototype cars, I've driven front wheel drive race cars, I've driven Porsches, every model. I've driven, mid-engine sports cars. I've driven, and he just kind of listed off all these different cars he's driven at Road Atlanta. He says, I don't think my line changes for any single one of them. He says, there are subtleties about how I get it to that line or where I want the car to be and things, but it's very, very little. And it's one of those things that I actually think that is overblown. This whole idea that, oh, that's the Porsche line, or the front wheel drive line, or whatever it is. I agree with Colin 1,000% that the line isn't a big deal. And I think to your point here is, but you do have to adjust your style, and depends on how you define style. To me, style is all about, not 90% of style is what you do in the timing and rate of release of the brakes as you enter the corner. So as you come into that corner, if you quickly come off the brakes, or do you slowly come off the brakes? Do you start coming off the brakes early, or do you come off the brakes late? How you get the car to come into the corner and how you get the car to follow that line is what you're doing in terms of adjusting that style. Yes, some cars, the difference between a spec Miata and an Indy car, an Indy car's got way more grip and it's got way more horsepower. Or let me take it actually. A Miata is a front wheel or front engine rear wheel drive car. Take a Cobra, either an old original Cobra or one of the new replicas of a Cobra. Both are front engine cars. Both are rear wheel drive cars. The Miata has more grip, more lateral grip than it does acceleration force. The Cobra has more acceleration force than it does lateral grip, to some extent. Okay. Those cars, you might change the way you approach the corner in terms of the Miata. You don't want to slow it down because you don't have the horsepower to speed it back up again. The Cobra, you don't care if you kind of come in, turn it, get the car to turn and point, it's the turn it, point, shoot back out of the corner. And so there's subtleties there. And, but most of that still comes down to what you do with the brakes. With the Miata, you want to brake as little as possible, and you want to start to ease off the brakes lightly but early to flow momentum through the corners. With the Cobra, you might come into that same corner and brake a little harder, and really get the car to change direction with some deeper trail braking, get the car to change direction, point it in that direction, and then stand on the throttle again to shoot it back out of that corner. Oh man, I could go off on a big tangent there about momentum cars there, but maybe somebody will ask about that. So again, Marcus, I'm going to say, maybe the biggest, as I read into your question here, it's the how. Well, how do you sense that? You have to sense, what is the car telling you in terms of what does it need? Does it need to carry speed through the corner because it just doesn't have a lot of acceleration force? Or does it need to take advantage of all that acceleration? In which case I'm going to kind of do more of a point and shoot, turn the car, get the car to shoot out of the corner. So, and most of that happens with the timing and rate of release of the brakes as you come into the end of the brake zone here. How you come off the brakes, it's going to help you get the car to rotate to come back out of this corner. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea there, Marcus. Hey, Michael just asked, Next question. Talk about driving momentum cars like the MX-5 or Barber F2000. So let me tell you this quick little story. A few years ago, I was at Oregon Raceway Park. I'm doing a session for a group of drivers. I think there are 8 drivers in this session. I'm doing a little breakout session before they go back on track. And I asked the question, how many of you, and this was at early in the day, I said, how many of you drive momentum cars? And 2 hands go up, and I go, what are you driving? One of them says, I drive a Miata. The other one says, I'm driving a 1 Series BMW. And I looked at the other drivers and I said, what are you guys driving? And this one guy said, I'm driving a 640 horsepower Corvette. It's not a momentum car. So we went through the day and we worked on all sorts of driving techniques from braking harder to working on the brake release, but we really worked on the timing and rate of release of the brakes so that you could enter the corner and still get the car to rotate into the corner with more speed, get the car to rotate so that then they could get out of the corner. At one point, just before noon, this fellow comes to me who's driving the Corvette. And, the Corvette's got that amazing data system, Cosworth data system built into it. And he comes to me and he says, could you look at my data and my video? Because something just happened to me on the track. And there was at Oregon Raceway Park, there's sort of, it's a corner that goes like this, and then like this, and then like this. So there's 2 corners with a tiny little straightaway in between. Think about this diagram here, but with a short straightaway in between. And then it goes on to this big long straightaway. And he went through this corner, and I can remember we're looking at the data, and the minimum speed in this corner that led onto the straightaway, his min speed, right around somewhere around the apex or just before the apex. Every single time we look at the data and the video and go, that's 39 miles an hour, 39 miles an hour, 39 miles an hour. And then one lap comes through there and it's 41 miles an hour, 2 miles an hour more at the apex. But you can also hear that he got back to throttle at the exact same place. So it didn't delay him getting back to power. And it's because of how he released the brake pedal. He got the car to rotate, not pitch the car sideways or anything, but just that subtle little bit of rotation in the car, just enough so that he could still carry that speed through the corner and get back to power at the same place. And what was really fun was on the video, you could hear him somewhere right about here go, yes, because he knew it. He felt it. He felt that he carried more speed through the corner and got back to power sooner. And we looked at the video and we talked about it, and I'm just like, see the difference in the way you release the brake pedal here and the timing and rate of release of the brakes. You use that to get the car to turn. And he looks at me and goes, I guess I'm driving a 640 horsepower momentum car. I was like, yes, every car is a momentum car. If you can start to accelerate from 1, or in this case, 2 miles an hour more, then you're going to have faster speed down here. Now, obviously, you can go too far. That's maybe 3. Maybe it's going to delay you getting back to power, and that's going to hurt. But that's the key. So, Michael, you said talk about driving momentum cars. I just talked about driving momentum cars. Every car is a momentum car to some extent. And kind of going back to the Miata versus Cobra thing, yes, you want to take advantage of what the car's strengths are, but that can be overdone. And I see a lot of drivers with non-momentum cars that have a lot of power that overslow. And which case it goes back to some of maybe the very first question that I dealt with was how do I improve my corner min speed? And, works on, it comes down to using lighter brakes and then using the timing and rate of release of the brakes to get the car to rotate and turn so that you can still get back to power and use the momentum of the car. Matt asked, do you have a process or method for choosing visual cues such as turning points, brake points? So yes, Matt, and let me so I did a whole couple-hour webinar on vision, I guess a year and a half or so ago. Time for me to probably do it again, and I've written a lot about this. And so there is a process. To me, the process, I'm gonna write this down, but it's okay. So there's 4 steps in my process. Okay, and I'm gonna go through this really quick. Okay, but I'm going to talk about these ones kind of in the second, third, and fourth ones. First. Okay, so the driver's coming down here, and let's say there's the turn-in point. I know that's too small, you can't quite see that, but you know what that is. That's the apex, and let's just say the exit of the corner is out here. Okay? So as this driver is coming down into here, the driver is also going to be aware of their begin of braking point. And let's say their begin of braking point is here. I'm going to write that over here. Begin of braking is BOB, sometimes called Bob. The end of braking point is, let's just say it's somewhere in around here, as I've done already a couple of times here. Okay, so as the driver is driving down the straightaway, what many drivers do is they focus their eyes here and think, I got to start braking there. And then they get to here and they're like, okay, now I got to look at the turn-in point. So they're looking here. And then they go, now I got to look for the apex point. And they look over here. And then they're looking out here. And they kind of do it like that because when they first learned to drive on a track, they went to some school and they had a pylon or a cone set here and here and here and here. And they connected the dots. And unfortunately, that kind of drilled in, programmed some vision techniques of going from there to there to there. Here's what I recommend is, and I did about 2 years of research around how the best drivers use their vision. And here's what they do. As they're coming here, you know what they're doing? Their eyes do a quick glance down into the corner down into here, somewhere in around this end of braking point in here, and do a quick glance up into there and go, yep, corner's still there, looks good, okay? All clear. And then their eyes come back to, and when they're approaching the begin of braking point, their eyes are already starting to look here. They're focusing their eyes here because they're going to judge their begin of braking point off of their end of braking point. So their eyes are down here, and yeah, they're kind of also in around the turn-in point. So they might be their eyes might be focusing here, but they've glanced way down into the corner here. Okay, so their eyes did a quick glance way up into here, and then they sort of come into the focus on the major reference points. Then as they come into here, they're doing a glance over to the apex, and their focus is somewhere around here. And so they kind of do this glance ahead, back to the focus. Peripherally, they're kind of doing oh yeah, I just went past my begin of braking point. Just went past that. And yeah, I'm still in good shape. As they come down into the turn in around this point here, they're doing a glance around over here as far as they physically can see, but their focus comes back to the apex here. And as they're going past the turn-in point, peripherally, they're checking on their turn-in point. And then as they get to somewhere over here, you know, actually back probably here, they're doing a glance out to the exit here. Their focus is around in here. And peripherally, they're checking as they go past the apex going, yep, I've clipped the apex in the right place. Or no, I'm wide of the apex, or I'm early to the apex, or I'm late on the apex. So I need to start to make some adjustments. So that's the process that the best drivers go through. Kind of a glance way ahead, come back and focus on the major references. Glance right ahead, come back and major focuses. Glance way ahead, major references. Glance way ahead, major references. Meanwhile, all the time checking how well they're doing with their peripheral vision. Obviously also using peripheral vision for checking mirrors. And you might be going, yeah, but what's number one here? It's mental. You know, one of the things, unless you're rallying where you don't know where the track or road goes, you know, even an autocross course, you've walked it or you've visualized it enough times that you know where the corner goes. So when you are way back here, if you can see that way down here, back here, mentally, you see this corner because you've been around it before. And obviously, the more times you've been around it, the more that memory or that imprint of that mental picture of what this corner looks like is. So that's the visual process that we use. And, you know, such as turn-in points, break points. So that's how we use it, is we use, you know, there's a begin and breaking point. I'm not saying we don't use that, but it becomes almost a secondary reference point to your end of breaking point, because Is it possible that you're going 5 miles an hour faster here than you did on the previous lap because you got a better exit out of there? Or 3 miles an hour slower because you got held up by traffic? Is that possible? Yes. We judge, when you're driving on the street and you come up to a traffic light, you don't look to the side of the road for a brake reference point to tell you where to start to brake. No, you look at where you're going to need to be stopped. You look for the end of braking point, that stop line in the intersection. And you judge it and you go, okay, based on that, I need to start to brake now this hard to bring it to a stop. We need to do that on the track more. And the best drivers do that. They judge. If you ask most of the best drivers, you say, where do you start braking for turn 3? They'll go, when it feels right. Well, what does that mean? It means they're looking down here and they're judging that they need to brake around here. And rather than, I'm going to say, the lesser drivers, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but typically it's the lesser experienced or lesser trained or the lesser knowledge in that way, is they have got this ingrained in their mind that I come down to the 3 marker and I start braking. Well, again, things can change. So you need to change, or you need to use your references. You need to look down here and judge where you need to begin braking off of your end of braking point. And then you're aware of your turn-in point, and you check on that as you go past it peripherally to go, yeah, I turned in the right spot, or I turned in early, or I turned in late. Now I need to make some adjustments based on that. John asks, when is he going to take another drink of water? Thanks, John, for... No, John asked, endurance racing, low horsepower car among higher horsepower cars. Tips on dealing with faster cars coming up behind just before braking zone. So, John, if it's me that's coming up behind you in that race, just pull off the side of the track and get out of my way, would you? Sorry, I didn't mean that. A little bit. Okay, so John, I've been in both of those situations. I've been in the slower car, and sometimes the slower car is only slower on the straightaways and not in the brake zones in the corners. And that's, I think, where you're really getting at. I've also been in the faster cars that come up really quick, and you just want that car to get out of your way. So the biggest thing here, I think, is, so let's say number one is, John, I'm going to put you you're in the low horsepower car, you're coming into the brake zone, and I'm in this really fast car, and I've got 10 miles an hour faster than you on the straightaway. So I'm catching you as you come into the brake zone. You have a couple of different options here. One is you can go as deep as you possibly can in here and kind of keep me behind you, and then we both drive through the corner like this, and as we come on the straightaway, I then go by you. That's perfectly good. That's really good. You have to make the judgment of, can you do that without it having a negative impact on you? Because sometimes what's going to happen there is you're going to come down like this, and I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to be here, and I can't quite get beside you, and I'm a bit of an idiot, so I'm going to kind of do this, and we're going to be going through the corner like this, and now both of us come through the corner, and we both just lost a second on our lap time. That doesn't do anybody any good. So you have to be aware enough when we come to that situation, when we come into the corner like this, if I'm doing this, sometimes the best thing that you can do is actually just to brake a little bit more and just let me clear you and then get a run like that, okay? Sometimes that's the best thing you can do. The other thing that you can do, and again, you have to make that judgment, is sometimes you're better off, rather than going all the way to your brake zone here, where you start to brake, you're beginning braking, and maybe you're going to brake a little bit early, not in an abrupt way or unexpected way, but just kind of breathe the throttle a little bit, breathe the throttle, and just let me get to here. And then we come into the corner, and you can just do this. And now that probably has not cost you even 1/10 of a second if you do it that way. So it comes down to the awareness and the judgment. And to be honest, that's one of the things, John, that I absolutely love about endurance racing. Endurance racing is all about that thinking strategically, thinking about, how can I pass pass and be passed with it costing me as little time as possible. You know, I know that you can get into this mode of, you know, I got to turn this quick lap time, or, you know, all this kind of stuff. Really what it comes down to is, in an endurance race, you have this much fuel and your job is to do as many laps in as little amount of time in that fuel stint. That's what endurance racing is all about. And if it means giving up 1/10 of a second in one corner, that's better off than fighting another car and being in a situation where you lose a second. You know, you can go, yeah, I got held up on that lap. Yeah, but it all adds up. So again, that's one of the things that I love about endurance racing is it's thinking strategically and thinking about how can I pass and be passed with it costing me as little time as possible in my lap times. Tom asked, as I've gotten older, well, really old, my entry to braking zones has gotten longer and longer. How do I get a better visual reference as to when to brake? Well, Tom, I think I just talked about that. I think, you know, to my point that I just made here is the single biggest thing that actually maybe one of, if not the most important thing that I've ever taught, trained, helped drivers with is the whole concept of using an end of braking point. And, you know, it's some drivers go, well, is the end of braking point, you know, is it at the turning point, or is it at that crack in the pavement, or it doesn't matter. I mean, what matters is that you look for the end of braking point. The search for the end of braking point is probably the most important part. And I have had drivers who, you know, they brake. Let's say that Lewis Hamilton in your car could brake right here. Actually, Daniel Ricciardo, because I think he's the king of the late breakers in Formula One. So he could brake right there. But you come in there because you are older, you're like, what, 35? You start braking here. 9 times out of 10, it's because there's too much focus on this and not enough focus on this. Because again, when you come in here and you start to judge, oh, I don't need to be slowed down to my min speed until somewhere around here, or it could be here, or it could be here. But it's judging where you want your end of braking point and getting your eyes up, and it forces you to look further into the corner. That usually fixes that. So that would be my kind of the very first step. The second, so visually, that's what you want to do. There's another step if you're really trying to work on braking later, and that is I would do some practice where you work on, you know, I drew the initial application of the brake pedal, the pressure. The initial application of the brake pedal, many drivers don't make that hard enough quick enough. And, you know, we've all been told to squeeze the brakes on. And I still believe that you can squeeze the brakes on, but there's a difference between hitting the pedal like that and that. And that is squeezing the brakes on, but really quickly and hard. And many drivers can find that if they just practice some laps where they apply the brakes harder, a harder initial application, they get the car slowed down and they find that, oh man, I've overslowed. Then it's easy to start to move the whole brake zone in. And that's maybe another part of this, Tom, is thinking about this as, you know, there's not a brake point here and an end point here. It's a zone. And you can take that whole zone and you can do that. And if you do that, that's more comfortable than thinking, I have to compress my brake zone. No, you actually just move the whole brake zone in. It's a whole lot easier way to think about it. Dean asked, I'm coaching someone that I can't get to push the car. Won't slide the car around. Drives on rails. This is per speed. So he goes to suggestions. Big one. Okay. I'm trying to think of all the many different ways we could approach this. Certainly, time on a skid pad will help. How much I don't know that driver, but many many drivers are uncomfortable with the car moving, and in a corner, it's, you know, that feeling that, oh, it's moving, it's starting to slide. If they spend time on a skid pad, will help that. So you start to build that comfort level. You know, I've seen drivers who were really, in this case, they drove the car on rails. They were uncomfortable with the car moving around, and I'd have them do a day on a skid pad, or they go to a rally school and they drive in the dirt and they slide the car around, and they get to the point where it's like, oh man, I love the feeling of the car just moving around and sliding around, and all of a sudden their speed picks up. So for sure, that's one of the ways that you can help with that. The other part of that is, I think, is mental imagery, mental programming. Part of it sometimes is their program is around, and I've worked with drivers who when I say, tell me what the perfect driver does, they explain this and they give me this mental model they have of a perfect driver never makes a mistake. Well, I like to think about the perfect driver makes a series of mistakes to the point where they correct them so early and so well that it seems like on the outside they're not making mistakes, but all driving at the limit is adapting and adjusting to a series of mistakes you've made. And so starting to change their mental model of what pushing the car looks like, feels like, sounds like. So having them imagine that and having them like, oh yeah. And then it becomes this whole idea of they get comfortable being a little uncomfortable. Like a lot of drivers, again, their mental programming is, ooh, the car's starting to move, I'm not comfortable with that. Then you get to the point where it's like, I love the feeling when the car is moving around, and I actually like being uncomfortable. I think about extreme athletes. Think of Travis Pastrana. He is uncomfortable when he's comfortable. Like if he's not risking his life, he's uncomfortable. He doesn't like that. And I'm not saying you need to go that far, but sometimes the big part here, Dean, is they just don't have a mental model of, I like being uncomfortable. It's like my approach to driving in the rain. The second you say, I don't like driving in the rain, you're last. You're slow. If you can change your mental programming to, I love driving in the rain, I love the feeling of the car moving, I love being that little, like it gives me a good feeling when I'm doing that. That's a big part of it. Peter asked, how do I stop over braking for corners in order to increase entry speed? Peter, I'd say the conversation we just had around focus more on your end of braking point, focus more on the timing and rate of release of the brakes. So as you come into the corner, you want to get to the point. So you want to get to the point where you're looking down into here and you're getting in here and you're coming off the brakes, and you are deliberately setting your corner entry speed, and you're deliberately setting a little higher than you have in the past. And so that would be the first thing. And then, as I said earlier, the second would be do some practice where all you do is you pound on the brake pedal harder in the very beginning, so you get comfortable with braking hard here. And I like to think about it as we want to do 2/3 of our braking in the first third of the brake zone, and then the last 2/3 of the brake zone, we do the last third of the braking pressure. So we have this last little bit in here where we can kind of go, oh, I can start to release the brake pedal a little sooner now because I can carry more speed in the corner. Looking at time, I'm going to try to rush through a little speed answering here now. Jeff, can you talk about how best to manage tire wear? So there's two ways to answer that. Accept the fact that you're driving on a track, you're going to wear out tires. Tires are a consumable. There's only so much you can save. Now, the flip side of that is there does come a time, and let's say you're trying to manage your budget, and if you're doing it to manage your budget, then you have to accept that you're going to drive slower. You can't have it all. You can't be at the ragged edge driving as fast as possible and save your tires at the same time. Now, if you are in a situation where, let's say you're racing an endurance race where you do have to save the tires a little bit because they've got to last a long period of time, the less scrub you put in the tire. And what you'll find is if you actually start to brake that tiny bit lighter, you come into the corner and you just try to be turning the steering wheel a little bit less than ever before. You might do that more with the brake release to help you get the car to change direction rather than turning using the front tires to turn the car, use the weight transfer to turn the car, puts less wear on those front tires. And then as you're coming out of the corners, rather than going slap on the throttle, it might be feed it in just a little tiny bit smoother. Those things will have an impact, a positive impact on tire wear. Eric, I have a car that I cannot make any changes to. It's either understeering or oversteering. Need a short list of techniques I can try to help. Whew. It's either understeering or oversteering. Good news is that tells me that you are driving the car at its limits, at least at times. Now, you might be, to this point here, you might be alternating between driving at 4 degrees and at 6 degrees and kind of going back and forth. So maybe think about it as think about it as you're trying to narrow it down so you spend more time at that peak. Well, that's an ugly 5. You're spending more time at that peak by smoothing out all of your inputs. So that would be one of the things that I would suggest. One of the things actually, here's a little drill exercise that has worked well with a lot of drivers I've coached. And that is, especially if you've got a car that is doing everything. Think about as you drive around the track, every single time you turn the steering wheel, there's 1 degree of steering. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. And think about it as every single time you put steering in, and even going back the other way, it's adding up. And over the course of a lap, let's say you've turned the steering wheel 700 degrees of rotation. And it's not like this is adding up and this is subtracting. It's all adding, okay? So it's absolute number. And you at the end of a lap, you've turned the steering wheel 700 degrees. Your next time you go on track, your goal is 650. You're going to work on how can I get around the track turning the steering wheel less. And I got to tell you, many, many years ago when I had my own performance racing school at a track, at the end of a day, we would go on the track and we would deliberately try to drive the track turning the steering wheel less. And it was such a valuable exercise. One way of doing that is to drive slower. That's not the point. It's drive the same lap time, but turning the steering wheel less. I would try that. John says, I'm an instructor for a local SCCA CRE racing experience class. What are the top 3 takeaways every new racer should get on day 1 of practice racing? John, I'm sorry that I'm not super clear on what level of drivers you've got in that class. Quick answer to that is awareness. So practicing better awareness and using the peripheral vision and using the mirrors and setting the mirrors so they're tilted out further than most drivers have them so they can see the sides. Having more general awareness all the way around, I think would be critical. So that's one of the things that comes to mind, because in a racing situation, you cannot have too much awareness. Let's see. Oh boy, the top 3 takeaways every new racer should get on day 1. Sorry, John, I think you're stumping me here. Just what those, because my mind goes in a million different directions of what they want. If it's a racing thing, it's more about the awareness and that. Maybe the second thing would be to begin asking themselves questions that's going to help them continue to learn. And I think a lot of drivers wait to be told what to do. And I think, if I could instill something in every driver listening on this, would be ask yourself more questions. What are the things? I mentioned earlier on that for racing, there's the outright speed, there's the track knowledge, and there's racecraft. And if you just get in the habit of asking yourself, which one of those 3 is the priority right now? What's the weakest part of those things? of those abilities. Is it track knowledge? Then I'm going to study the track more. I'm going to learn from other people and watching and stuff like that. So, so asking more questions. And then maybe a third one would be just simply, not simply, but being more aware of what the car wants and needs, and understand that every car has a weakness. Part of your job in driving it is to find its weakness. So drive the car to the point where it says, I am oversteering, I am understeering, I am nervous on corner entry, don't put the power down, whatever. Michael asks, is there a Speed Secrets book in the works specifically geared towards sim racing? I've been asked that a lot lately, and I'm not going to say no. I'm not sure that a book is the right format, venue, whatever for that knowledge now, which is why I'm doing it online with the Sim Racer Academy. And you know what? It is 90 minutes in. Wow. As I said at the very beginning, I am not going to get to all the questions. The good news is that you've given me many questions. You give me many questions that are going to feed my Ask Ross column for the next 12 years. And but if there's something very specific here that you want, again, email it to me at info@speedsecrets.com, and I will get an answer to you at some point in time. Just maybe not right smack right now. But I really appreciate all this. And I'm going to go a little bit more. Justin asked, for someone who had to take a step back from racing for almost 2 years, would you have recommendations on jumping back in? Would you just jump right back into wheel-to-wheel racing, or would you recommend something like time trials first to get familiar again? Justin, I guess I would go to what I said earlier about the, is it outright speed? Is it track knowledge? Is it racecraft? That is a priority. And so if you were like just sitting there going, okay, this year I'm going back, I haven't been there, you may not know what the answer, what are the priorities there? You may not know, but you may be able to say, 2 years ago when I was racing, my racecraft was really good. I just needed a little bit more speed. Okay. That case, I might go, okay, spend a little bit of practice time, track time, doing track days, whatever it takes for you to get time to really focus on your outright speed. If it was like, a couple of years ago, my speed was pretty good. I knew the tracks well, but racecraft wasn't good. Then jumping back into wheel stuff is going to be important, I think. So, that will be the first step I would take if you don't know what your weakness is. And weakness is a relative term, right? It may be just slightly weaker than the other ones, but that would be the very first thing. But I think when you think about it in terms of your job when you go racing is you've got outright speed, you've got track knowledge, and you've got racecraft. Think about which of those three needs the most emphasis, and that might help you there. Volas asks, how do you approach entry angle into long corners like 1-2 at Suzuka or 1-2 at Lime Rock? I feel like I can slightly turn in before I start braking, which goes against the standard sequence of brake, turn, and accelerate. So yes, there are corners. Certain cars, for sure, turn 1-2 at Lime Rock. I haven't done enough sim stuff at Suzuka. I need to do that. Seems silly that I haven't, but and I've not driven there yet being the key word. But for sure, there are corners in some cars at Daytona, like in some of the other Rovals, where you come off the oval and down in the infield. There are some of those corners, and again, Lime Rock is one of those ones where for some cars you can brake so late that you can actually turn the wheel and then kind of, it's this with the steering wheel though. It's turn, straighten, brake, and try to brake. And you might have a little steering in, but your goal is to have as little steering in when you're braking in. And then you kind of brake in on that angle going to the corner. So if it was this corner, and this is not exactly it, but you might come down like this, and you might go boom, and you might turn it here, kind of straighten the wheel and brake, ease off, rotate the car, and come back out again. So I think that absolutely, yes, it's not standard, but it works. Dominic asks, understeer leading to snap oversteer. Why does it happen? How to correct for it? How to avoid it? Oh, great question, Dominic. So the very first thing about that is, and this goes to the debrief process of you've got a problem with, you know, this is a real classic situation is a driver comes in, could be an IndyCar driver, says to the engineer that's getting paid $500,000 a year, and says to that engineer, car understeers on the corner entry and oversteers on the exit. And the engineer looks at the driver and says, which one do you want me to fix first? And the driver goes, fix that snap oversteer. That's the thing that's going to kill me. The corner entry understeer, I can deal with that. But here's the thing. It is the corner entry understeer that's causing the snap oversteer. Because what happens a lot of times is the driver comes in the corner, they turn in, they get some understeer. And what does human nature tell us to do when we want to go over here, but the car is going here? Human instinct is turn the wheel more. So we turn the wheel a little more. We get some scrub. The front tires hook up and they go boom. And the car snaps like this. And now we get some oversteer. So the very, very first thing, and you know, in the why does it happen? A lot of times what happens is that, okay? How do you know if that's what it is? You need to become more aware of what you are doing when it happens. So if you just simply start become more aware of, when I turn in, what do I do with the wheel when I get that understeer? And for sure, if you hold the wheel there and if you actually bring it back a little bit and kind of start to try to correct the understeer the right way, and then you get some snap oversteer, that's one thing. But if you turn into the corner and then you find that you're doing a little bit more of this and the front end kind of hooks up and then snaps to oversteer, then you need to fix it with the steering wheel first. And that would be the very, and by the way, again, Dominic, it's very common. A lot of drivers do that. It's a little bit of instinct. Howard asks, when going into a turn, what is meant by the turn slip angle? Whoo, boy. Okay, the simple answer to that is, okay. Okay, so we're going around this corner like this. We turn the front tires like this. When we turn the front tires, we turn the steering wheel, we turn the front tires on this angle. If you think about it, they're pointing that angle right there, okay? If we're going fast enough, we know that there's some slip or slide from those tires. And it's actually some twisting in the carcass of the tire and the way it interacts. Big, long technical details there. What you really need to know is that as you turn in and you get a little bit of that, slip there, the car actually goes in that direction. The difference between those two angles, that is a slip angle. And that is this. So the faster you go, the more slip there is. And actually the way a tire works, it actually gains grip when there's more slip up to some amount. And that little tiny bit of difference there, and you know, in this little example here, I've said there's a 5-degree difference between, or a 5% even, if you want to think about it that way, difference between the angle that I've turned the steering wheel and the direction the car is going. That's the slip angle. And a tire actually achieves its most grip. And again, it has to do with the way the tire interlocks with the road and the way it twists and all that kind of stuff. And it's actually the wheel that has turned this much and the tire carcass or contact patch is still there, but it kind of twists. But that is the slip angle. And obviously it happens at the rear. It's just harder to visualize that part. That is slip angle. And yeah, we could spend 2 hours just on that. Anders asked, when racing, I can drive away from some of the competition, but when I get stuck behind them, it is very difficult to pass. What should I try next time that happens? Go faster. Sorry, Anders. Okay, so a couple things. The very first thing is a lot of times when one driver catches this driver, then they start to focus on this car rather than on the act of driving that got them close. So I'd say the very first thing, Anders, is be aware of how much are you focusing on your driving and how much are you focusing on that car that you're following, and try to take the focus off of that car that you're following and more on the what it took to catch that car. So that's the very first thing. And then the second part of that is then it comes down to racecraft, and racecraft comes down to positioning your car, as I said earlier on, in a way that communicates to the driver you're trying to pass that you are going to pass. And a lot of times I would say racecraft and passing is more about your mindset than anything else. And I would, I know from experience that I can almost telegraph to the car in front of me, I'm coming, I'm going to pass you. And I've had drivers say to me, I looked in the mirror and I saw you coming. I was like, I'm getting out of your way, because I knew you were coming through, even though we were pretty close in speed. So a big part of it is just, it's your mindset of, if your mindset is, I'm going to the front, I'm going to pass you, you will find a way to get there. And again, there's technique and all that other stuff involved, but a big part of that is simply your mindset. Okay, so Robin, have you I'm going to say now, please, certainly don't post any more questions. I should have said that a while ago. And okay, so Robin said we're done that, because that's how many questions I still have to go here. So obviously I'm not going to get through all of them, and I'm going to apologize right now for not being able to get through every single one of them. Again, I will try to use as many of these as I can in my Ask Ross column on my website. So if you go to speedsecrets.com, click on the little Ask Ross thing. I actually looked through there the other day, and there's got to be, I don't know, there's well over 50. Q&As that are already in there, and maybe more, and I'll be adding some more of that. Robin's holding up a little note saying people are asking about whether this is going to be recorded. It is recorded, as long as there's no technical difficulties, and I'll know in about 2 hours or so after we're done here. I will try to send out a note with a link to this. Actually, you should be able to sign back in. The webinar platform has a way that you can go back in and sign back in and access the replay thing. So you could try that. I will try to put this and post this somewhere and send an email to everybody who signed up for this, and with a link to it as well. So if anybody's going to leave, I'm looking at my clock and I'm going, tell you what, I'm going to carry on for 15 minutes here. But if anybody wants to drop off now, again, thank you for being on here. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for letting me play cards with all of you. Thank you for staying involved with Speed Secrets and being part of my Speed Secrets team. And Happy New Year to all of you. And in the meantime, for those of you who want to stay for another 15 minutes, I'm going to take a couple more here. Joey asked, over a crest, my front wheel drive hatch jumps in revs and I can't put the power down. Many people say the fix is a limited slip differential as opposed to an open diff, but that sounds like a band-aid on the problem. Are there driving techniques or suspension tweaks I could try to mitigate the problem? Okay, so the very first thing from a pure suspension perspective, if you think about what's happening, and I know this Ford GT is not your front wheel drive hatchback, but as you go crest that hill and you come over, these front tires are, whether they're coming completely off the ground or partially unloaded, that's what's happening. So one of the things you could try, if you have the ability, is you could try softening the front dampers rebound, because rebound is what, when you compress a shock absorber and a spring, but if you compress a shock absorber, that's compression or bump, that is rebound. Extension of the shock is rebound. And if you have too much rebound, as you go over that hill, that crest of the hill, it won't allow that wheel to drop down fast enough. So if you soften the front damper, the rebound on it, it might drop that down more. So as you go over, the tires may stay on the ground longer or stay closer loaded to the road or the track longer. So that's one thing you could try as a suspension thing. Between a limited slip and a open diff, so one thing a limited slip will do is it will put the power to the wheel that has the most grip. And an open diff, you might find that because of the nature of the crest and all that kind of stuff, that one side is becoming less loaded than the other. Well, limited slip would help that. So that would help, or it could help. That could help but you're not going to know that until you try it. And unfortunately, probably slipping or changing from a limited slip diff from your open diff is going to cost some money. So that would be the very first thing. Depending on the crest of the hill and all other things, I mean, you could try essentially just before you crest the hill, you do a little lift on the throttle, or I know of drivers and rally drivers do this, is they'll give just a little brush of the brake with the left foot to try to get the front end of the car to kind of just drop. The downside is if you time that wrong, it can get a little ugly. So I'd say you just have to be careful about that, about getting that right. Jack asked, new 911 Carrera 4 GTS owner, want to get professional DE instruction. Do you have a recommendation? Yes, get it. There are just so many different organizations that you can go to get great instruction. And, you talk about the new car. I don't know what your driving experience is like here, Jack, but, so the different car clubs, Porsche, PCA, BMW, Audi clubs, some of the other clubs, some of the for-profit, I don't think they make that much profit. Like HOD, Chin, Driver's Edge, and I apologize to any of them that I've left out here, SCDA, any of them that I've left out. I apologize for not getting them off the top of my head here right now, but any of those organizations will help. And I highly recommend that you get that. What I would also do is take the time to communicate with the organizers of the event. And yes, if anybody listening here, you in the chat area, you can give Jack all sorts of advice here of what organization is your favorite. But let them know what your experience is. Let them know what you've driven in the past, what you're driving now, and most of them will help line you up with an instructor who has experience and can help work with you in that car. Rich asks, any advice for learning how to take advantage of aero? I'm new to a Revolution A1 and I'm not sure if I could be going faster through corners. Rich, I covered that whole thing around aero early on. I don't know if this question was asked later on. Rather than take a bunch of time on that, I'm going to suggest that go back early on in the first 15, 20 minutes or so. I covered the first 30 minutes at least. I covered some stuff around aero just to kind of speed up and get through a few more here. So, Rich, I suggest going back to that and hear what I had to say there, because it's all about trust of and inching up on that limit and trusting that the aero is going to help you. Lois asks, with younger students attending every day, are you noticing that these new young students have a shorter attention span? What are you seeing that works better for these new, younger, and more technology-focused students? Here's an interesting thing is I have not noticed the shorter attention span part. And I guess I almost look for it. And to be honest, I'm not there in the trenches every single day these days doing that, because I'm doing lots of this kind of stuff now. But I would say that I'm not seeing that. And I think the reason is that this sport is so attention demanding. There's it's like the cure for ADD or ADHD is put people in a car on a track and let them drive, because it forces everybody to focus. So once they're on the track, I don't think there's I'm not seeing any problem with that. I do believe that as instructors, we need to look at different ways to teach people, younger people, how to, and the way they like to be taught and the way they learn best has changed. And, for example, one of the things I've been pushing for a while now is when I started, I went to a school, racing school, and I sat in a classroom session for an hour or more. And, I'd done my homework and all that kind of stuff, but I sat there and even I was like, come on, can I just get out on the track? And I think that's even more so today. If you take a younger driver and you have them show up at an event and say, okay, go sit in that classroom and listen to somebody talk for an hour, tune-out time. And so I'm a great believer that a lot of the instruction needs to happen beforehand and in short little bites, and it can happen all online. These drivers would much prefer if they had 2, 3, 5-minute little video clips and pieces like that that they can watch on their phone in the days leading up to that. And then when they get to the track, the session in the classroom is more of a Q&A session where it's more interactive rather than they shove a bunch of stuff down your throat. So I could get on the soapbox on that one, boy. You asked, what is the relation between the brake pressure and threshold? Trying to understand that question. Okay, so threshold braking is, let me just describe that. So threshold braking, if you're driving a car that does not have anti-lock brakes, threshold braking is you brake with so much pressure that the wheels stop turning and they lock up and they skid. Okay, so that is lockup. Threshold braking is when you get to that point just on the threshold of that happening. The tires are still turning, but they're almost locking up. In fact, they might be turning 5% slower than the car is moving. So they're like, that's threshold braking. ABS does that through technology. It has little sensors watching the wheels turn, and as soon as it starts to lock up, it releases a little pressure, locks up, release, locks up, release, locks up, release, to the point where it's doing that at 30, 40 times per second, to the point where it basically imitates threshold braking. So that brake pressure is what dictates that. When you are threshold braking, I call that's a 10. Like I said, it's on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a 10. If you're under a 10, it could be a 9 pressure out of 10. So hopefully that answered your question. Mark asked, how can I find the limit on a wet track without overslowing or going off into the weeds? So Mark, the single biggest lesson that I learned that has helped me in my own driving, particularly in the rain, but it applies to the dry as well, is early in my career, I had some races in the rain and I got my butt kicked. And then I went and practiced on the track. And what I discovered on my own was if I came into the corner and I made the car do something, and that doesn't mean like pitching it sideways or anything like that. Nothing super dramatic. But if I entered the corner and I just started to come off the brakes a little sooner, and by coming off the brakes a little sooner, I kind of unloaded the front a little bit. I made the car understeer. And then what I found was that, okay, now that it's understeering, I can work with that. I know what I've got because I'm not surprised by it. And so what a lot of drivers, what they do in terms of trying to find the limit on a wet track is they come into a corner, they slow down, and then they go through the corner and go, when's it going to start to slide? When's it going to start to slide? Then it starts to slide. And it catches them by surprise. So you need to be more proactive. And being proactive with the car and making the car do something the instant that I'm entering a corner, then I'm like, I can deal with this. I've got some understeer. I can just, straighten the wheel a tiny little bit, ease out of the throttle just a little bit, feel for that. And if the car starts oversteer, like it's not surprising me doing that. So that would be the most important thing is just make the car do something. And again, it sort of goes back to what I was talking about earlier on is you have to get comfortable being a little uncomfortable. Okay, I think we're coming down to this might be the last one because it's a long one here. I haven't read it all, but Bill asked this. When I started my on-track activity, there was a focus on braking in a straight line before starting the turn. However, now I have moved into higher levels of racing. I need to start moving to trail. What is the best way to start the transition? The muscle memory of braking in a straight line is very strong. Oh, Bill, I hate it when I hear this because it's one of my pet peeves is that drivers get taught this, brake in a straight line before the corner. And then someday you'll have to learn not to do that. It's just a terrible thing to do. So how do you fix that? Guess what? When I went to my very first racing school, that's what they taught me. And I came back and started racing, and I wasn't good enough. And I started to just realize that I didn't even know what trail braking really was, but because the school had never even mentioned that phrase. But I started to realize that that's other drivers sort of seemed like they were sort of braking just a little bit in the corner. Here's what I did. I took my street car. I went to an area that was like a industrial park in the evenings. It's basically deserted, but it's all this, connecting little roads that all went all through this industrial park. And it was quite a big industrial park not far from where I lived. And I took my streetcar there, and I would drive around, and I would deliberately like brake way into every 90-degree corner, to the point where it was like I would almost brake all the way to the apex. And so I was exaggerating when I was doing it. But I would practice like just slowly coming off the brakes as I was doing that. And I did that over and over and over again, to the point where I was building the muscle memory for getting the timing and rate of release of the brakes correct for what I needed the car to do. And again, what I would do is I would do that and then kind of realize that, wow, this makes the car react differently. And I liked it. And then when I got back on the track, it was easy for me to do. So that would be how I would approach it, Bill. And, obviously do it with respect. You don't have to drive fast to do this, and then just every time you're driving, I don't care if you're driving like a, big minivan or Suburban or something like that, but just drive. And every single time you come to every intersection or, turn in your driveway, make your end of braking point some point after the turn in, and just slowly come off the brakes and practice what that feels like and start to build the muscle memory of that. The single biggest thing there is being aware of, are you releasing the brake pedal like this, like this, like this, like this, and just start feeling that, what it does to your car on the street even. So it will make a difference. Okay, I lied. I'm going to do one more. Turbin asked, I'm going to spend the rest of my life learning how to brake. Yes, me too. Thank you for that. I agree. I'm working hard on releasing the brake better, but I recently had an instructor friend ride with me, and he observed that I stomped on the brake too rapidly. He suggested pressing firmly and deeply, but not so brutally. What are your thoughts? Corbin, this is a good one. Please take this the right way. I don't want this to come across as me kind of saying, oh, look at me. When I've taken people for rides around a racetrack, and it could be in a real, basic street car, it could be in a race prepared car, whatever. But I've taken people for rides around a racetrack. I've had people come afterwards and say, wow, you're very, very smooth, except when you apply the brake pedal. And when I apply the brake pedal in most modern cars, hey, going back to, I think it was Ed way in the beginning talked about an MGB. I'm going to be a little more gentle with it because the way those brakes work. But in most modern cars now, that initial application needs to be hard and fast as quickly as you can. You want to get as much of it done as you can in the brake, early in the brake zone. So I would have people say, man, you're smooth, but you're really abrupt on the brakes, except for there. And when I apply the brakes, if I don't notice my passenger over here go like this, then I know that I haven't braked hard enough. So now, again, there is a difference. As I said earlier, there's a difference between that and that. So I'm not saying that your instructor was wrong. There may be that you're smacking the brake pedal. And yes, some cars, when you smack the brake pedal, do too much of this. And if you're just a little bit like, again, a really fast squeeze will make the car do that, but not that. And that car will have more grip than that car will. So you need to find out what that is. So I would rather have somebody that break that initial application a little too hard and a little abrupt, and then just try to smooth that out a little bit, than I would the other way around. Because again, kind of going back to the previous question of, a lot of it's around muscle memory. And if you are too gentle and too smooth getting on the brakes, that's hard to change that. So making that quick and making it abrupt and hard initial, I think is an important thing. Okay, that's it. That's 2 hours. Again, thank you for all of you who have stayed on, and thank you, Robin, for keeping track of all these questions. Again, I will try to get through these in some way. And again, if it's if your question is in here somewhere, I haven't answered, feel free to email at me at info@speedsecrets.com. Send it to me, and I will try to get an answer to you at some point in time as quickly as I can, whether it's email or as part of my Ask Ross column on my website. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for, again, letting me kind of play cars and driving with you today. And keep learning, keep having fun. Happy New Year. Have a great 2022.